November 25, 1943, 0542 hours, 3 miles south of Monte Cassino, Italy. First Lieutenant Sarah O'Brien, Army Nurse Corps, 95th Evacuation Hospital, stood in the shell-damaged doorway of San Pietro Monastery, watching German sniper positions through morning fog. Behind her, 187 wounded American soldiers lay on improvised cots, some missing limbs, others wrapped in blood-stained bandages. In 12 hours, it would be Thanksgiving. The men had nothing. O'Brien had something else: 3 frozen turkeys hidden under a tarp in a British supply truck, an intact monastery oven she'd discovered the previous night, and a plan every officer at the 95th called suicidal. German snipers controlled the ridge 300 yards north. One errant movement near the monastery's exposed western wall, where the oven sat, meant death. But O'Brien had watched too many boys die over the past 6 weeks. Today, she was giving them Thanksgiving. The next 14 hours would prove that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with rifles. This is the story of how one Army nurse's unauthorized mission to cook Thanksgiving dinner under active sniper fire changed everything. 187 wounded soldiers believed about survival, hope, and what mattered in war. Sarah O'Brien, born 1917, grew up in Chicago's South Side, where her father ran a corner grocery through the Depression. She learned to stretch every ingredient, to make something from nothing, to feed people when there was barely enough. When nursing school accepted her in 1936, she worked nights at Cook County Hospital, seeing knife wounds, industrial accidents, poverty's violence. Pearl Harbor happened her final semester. She enlisted February 1942, age 24, driven by what she'd seen in Chicago, people helping each other when systems failed. The Army Nurse Corps trained her at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, where instructors emphasized military procedure, sterile technique, officer decorum. They said nothing about cooking under sniper fire. The 95th Evacuation Hospital deployed to North Africa, July 1943, then Sicily in August, finally, mainland Italy in October. They followed the grinding Allied advance up the Italian peninsula, setting up field hospitals in damaged schools, abandoned factories, whatever buildings still had roofs. By November, they'd reached the approaches to Monte Cassino, where the German Gustav Line held. O'Brien arrived at the San Pietro Monastery position November 20th, 5 days before Thanksgiving. The 95th had converted the partially destroyed building into a 200-bed evacuation hospital. The monastery sat in a slight valley, protected from direct artillery fire but exposed to German observation posts on the ridges. Snipers picked off anyone who moved carelessly during daylight hours. November 1943. Allied field hospitals in Italy faced casualty rates medical staff had never anticipated. The fighting at Monte Cassino produced what doctors called artillery trauma, massive tissue damage from German 88mm shells, shrapnel wounds that required immediate surgery, amputations performed in tents lit by kerosene lamps. The 95th Evacuation Hospital received an average of 40 to 60 wounded soldiers daily during the November offensive. They had morphine, sulfa drugs, surgical instruments. They had dedicated doctors who operated 18-hour shifts. What they didn't have was hope. O'Brien watched it drain from the men. Private First Class Thomas McKenna, 19, from Brooklyn, lost his right leg November 18th. He stopped talking November 21st, just stared at the monastery ceiling. Corporal James Wu, 23, Sacramento, took shrapnel across his chest and abdomen November 19th. He survived surgery but refused food. Sergeant Robert Hayes, 28, Georgia, lost his left arm at the elbow November 22nd. He asked O'Brien to stop wasting morphine on him. The pattern repeated across 187 beds. Physical wounds they could treat. Psychological wounds, the realization that their war was over, that they were damaged, that nobody cared. Those wounds festered. Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison, chief medical officer of the 95th, had seen it before in North Africa and Sicily. "They give up," he told O'Brien November 23rd. "We save their bodies, they kill their spirits. By spring, half will be dead from infections they don't fight off." Standard Army policy said, maintain medical focus, don't fraternize, process casualties efficiently. Nobody mentioned Thanksgiving. Supply officers said special meals were impossible. They barely had enough medical supplies, let alone turkey and fixings. O'Brien had watched Private McKenna die inside. She decided, November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, that procedures and regulations had failed these men. Time to try something unauthorized. November 23rd, 1943, 2130 hours. O'Brien finished her shift and did something against regulations. She explored the monastery's undamaged western wing alone. Most of the building had taken artillery damage during the Allied advance in October, but the western section, protected by the hillside, remained relatively intact. In what had been the monastery's kitchen, she found a massive brick oven. German forces had used it before retreating. It showed recent use, ash still warm, firewood stacked nearby. More importantly, it worked. The chimney drew properly. The iron door sealed. She tested it by building a small fire, watching the draft, checking for structural damage. The problem: the oven sat against the monastery's western wall, with windows facing the German positions 300 yards north on the ridge. Anyone working there during daylight would be visible to enemy snipers. The 95th had lost 2 orderlies to sniper fire 3 days earlier when they'd ventured too close to that wall retrieving supplies. O'Brien studied the angles. The morning sun backlit the monastery, making the western windows dark to observers. But by 0800 hours, when sunlight shifted, anyone inside would be silhouetted. The Germans knew every firing lane, every exposure point. They had observers with binoculars who called shots to snipers positioned in the rocks. She did calculations. Turkey needed 4 hours at proper temperature. To serve Thanksgiving dinner by noon, she'd need to start cooking by 0600 hours. That gave her 2 hours of relative darkness, 2 hours of increasing visibility. Every regulation said this was insane. O'Brien returned to the main ward, said nothing to anyone, and started planning. November 24th, 0630 hours. O'Brien approached Captain James Reynolds, supply officer, requesting 3 turkeys for Thanksgiving. Reynolds, 45, career Army, looked at her like she'd requested a tank. "Lieutenant, we're in a combat zone. We're rationing medical gauze. You want poultry?" "The men need it, sir." "The men need morphine and plasma. Request denied." Standard channels had failed. O'Brien tried unofficial channels. She found Sergeant Michael O'Malley, Irish, 32, who'd survived North Africa by knowing every black market contact in the Mediterranean theater. She told him what she needed. O'Malley whistled low. 3 turkeys, frozen, delivered by tomorrow morning. Ma'am, that's gonna cost. How much? Your personal liquor ration for 6 months, and you didn't hear this from me. O'Brien hadn't touched her liquor ration in 3 months. She didn't drink. Done. Where? British Quartermaster Company, 2 miles south. They got a refrigeration truck from a supply depot at Naples. Somehow 3 turkeys might fall off that truck tonight, if someone's there to catch them. She met the truck at 2300 hours, November 24th. 3 frozen turkeys, 12 pounds each, wrapped in canvas. The British sergeant driving accepted her liquor chits without questions. Getting them back to the monastery meant carrying 36 pounds of frozen turkey 3/4 of a mile through darkness, past German positions, without being detected. O'Brien made 2 trips, hiding the turkeys in the monastery's damaged wine cellar. By 0300 hours, November 25th, Thanksgiving morning, she had everything staged in the western kitchen. 3 turkeys, basic seasoning scrounged from hospital stores, firewood, and a functional oven in a sniper-exposed room. Every manual said cooking under enemy observation was prohibited. She didn't care what the manual said. November 25th, 1943, 05:45 hours. O'Brien entered the western kitchen carrying the first turkey, already thawing. She'd woken at 0400 hours to begin preparation, stuffing improvised from hardtack bread and dehydrated onions, basic salt and pepper seasoning, water for basting. The monastery was silent except for occasional moans from the ward, the distant rumble of artillery to the north. German positions on the ridge remained quiet. They typically didn't start sniper activity until 0730 hours when visibility improved. She built a fire in the brick oven, using dry wood that produced minimal smoke. The chimney drew well, pulling heat evenly. While the oven heated, she prepared the first turkey, working by lamplight, keeping movements minimal near the windows. 06:15 hours. First turkey in the oven. She calculated 4 hours cooking time, which meant it would finish at 10:15 hours, well into the danger window when German snipers would be active, and sunlight would silhouette anyone in the kitchen. O'Brien positioned herself against the eastern wall, away from the windows, checking the turkey every 15 minutes. The brick oven held temperature perfectly. The monastery's Italian builders had known their craft. 0730 hours. Sunlight touched the monastery's eastern wall. German positions came alive. She heard movement echoing across the valley, voices calling in German, the metallic sounds of rifles being positioned. The snipers were setting up. Captain Margaret Sullivan, head nurse, found O'Brien at 0745 hours. "Sarah, what are you doing?" "Cooking Thanksgiving dinner, ma'am." Sullivan stared at the oven, the turkey inside, the exposed windows. "Are you insane? German snipers have line of sight to this entire wall. One movement near those windows and you're dead." "Then I won't move near the windows, ma'am." "I'm ordering you to stop this immediately." O'Brien met her eyes. "Ma'am, Private McKenna hasn't spoken in 4 days. Corporal Wu refuses food. Sergeant Hayes asked me to stop wasting morphine on him. These men are dying because they've given up. I'm giving them one reason to keep fighting." Sullivan looked at the turkey, at O'Brien, at the windows where German snipers waited. "If you get killed doing this, I'm putting insubordination in your file posthumously." "Yes, ma'am." Sullivan left. O'Brien checked the turkey, browning perfectly, and started preparing the second bird. 0830 hours. The first German sniper shot of the day cracked through the morning air, hitting the monastery's eastern wall 50 yards from the kitchen. A warning shot. The Germans had observers watching the building, noting movement patterns, identifying targets. O'Brien crouched against the eastern wall, away from the windows, basting the first turkey by reaching around the oven's left side. The position kept her below the window sight lines, but made working difficult. Her back ached from the awkward angle. The heat from the oven, intense in the enclosed space, made breathing hard. 0915 hours. Second sniper shot, closer. The round punched through the kitchen's western window, shattering glass, impacting the wall 2 feet above the oven. Stone chips sprayed. O'Brien didn't move. She'd calculated the angles. As long as she stayed below the window line, crouched against the eastern wall, the snipers couldn't get a clean shot without exposing themselves to Allied counter-sniper positions. But opening the oven door to check the turkey required standing, becoming visible for 2 seconds. She'd counted the pattern. German snipers fired approximately every 12 minutes. They had multiple shooters, rotating positions, but their firing sequence was predictable. They targeted the same areas at intervals. She waited for the next shot. 09:27 hours. The round hit the monastery's northwest corner. 12-minute pattern confirmed. That gave her a 10-minute window. 09:30 hours. O'Brien stood quickly, opened the oven door, checked the turkey, perfect color, internal temperature rising, closed the door, dropped back to her crouch. Total exposure time, 4 seconds, no shot. She started preparing the third turkey, hands steady despite the adrenaline. Corporal Anthony Marino, orderly, found her at 1,000 hours. He'd been helping with morning wound dressings and heard about the cooking operation. "Lieutenant, you need help?" "Too dangerous, Corporal. One person is enough risk." "Ma'am, with respect, you can't handle 3 12-pound turkeys alone. Let me help." O'Brien studied him. Marino, 26, from Philadelphia, had survived Sicily and Salerno. He'd seen enough death to understand calculated risks. Stay below the window line. Move only when I say. Follow my timing exactly. Yes, ma'am. They worked in sync, 2 people choreographing movements around sniper fire. When O'Brien checked the first turkey at 10:15 hours, Marino prepped the third. When German snipers fired at 10:18 hours, pattern holding, they both stayed frozen until the shot passed. The first turkey came out at 10:20 hours, perfectly browned, internal temperature 165 degrees. O'Brien and Marino moved it to a makeshift cooling rack positioned against the eastern wall. Second turkey went into the oven immediately. The smell hit like a weapon. Roasted turkey in a field hospital where most meals were canned rations. The scent carried through the monastery, reaching the main ward where 187 wounded soldiers lay on cots. Private McKenna, who hadn't spoken in 4 days, said, "Is that turkey?" 10:45 hours. German artillery opened up, targeting Allied positions 2 miles south. The bombardment created noise, confusion, dust clouds. O'Brien realized the implications immediately. Artillery fire meant increased German military activity, which meant more observers, more snipers, more attention to the monastery. A sniper round punched through the kitchen's southern window at 10:53 hours, earlier than the 12-minute pattern. They were changing tactics, firing more frequently. O'Brien and Marino stayed pressed against the eastern wall, waiting. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison found them at 1100 hours. The chief medical officer stood in the doorway, not entering the sniper-exposed room, looking at O'Brien crouched beside the oven with the second turkey cooking. "Lieutenant O'Brien, I could court-martial you for this." "Yes, sir." "You're violating at least 6 standing orders about exposure to enemy fire." "Yes, sir." "The men in the ward are talking about Thanksgiving dinner for the first time in weeks." Private McKenna asked when it would be ready. Corporal Wu requested extra morphine so he could stay awake to eat. O'Brien met his eyes. "Sir, they needed hope more than they needed another lecture about accepting their condition." Morrison looked at the turkey in the oven, at the shattered windows, at the bullet impacts in the walls. "You have until 1300 hours. Then I'm ordering you out of this room, whether the cooking is finished or not. Clear?" "Yes, sir." He left. O'Brien checked the second turkey, halfway done, and started calculating. Third turkey needed 4 hours. If she put it in now at 11,010 hours, it wouldn't finish until 15,010 hours, 2 hours past Morrison's deadline. Unless she increased the oven temperature, shortened cooking time, risked undercooking. Or she cooked 2 turkeys simultaneously, using the oven size to her advantage, gambling that the brick construction could maintain heat with double the load. Marino saw her thinking. "What's the plan, ma'am?" "We're putting 2 turkeys in at once. It'll strain the oven temperature, might not cook evenly, but we're out of time." "The colonel said 1300 hours. Then we'd better work fast." They staged the third turkey. When the second came out at 11:45 hours, O'Brien and Marino immediately loaded both the second and third turkeys together. The oven's heat dropped 20 degrees from the double load. O'Brien added more wood, monitored temperature, prayed the brick construction could handle the demand. 1200 hours, noon, Thanksgiving. Outside, German artillery intensified. Sniper fire increased to shots every 8 minutes. The monastery shook from near misses. In the main ward, 187 wounded soldiers waited for dinner that might kill the nurse cooking it. 15 hours. O'Brien rotated the turkeys in the oven, swapping positions to ensure even cooking. The movement required standing, exposing herself to the window sight lines for 6 seconds. She counted down the sniper pattern. Last shot at 1208 hours. Next expected 1216 hours. Stood at 1214 hours. Rotated the birds. Closed the oven. Dropped back to cover. Sniper round at 1216 hours. Exactly on pattern. It missed her by timing alone. Marino was pale. "Ma'am, this is insane." "Corporal, sanity doesn't serve Thanksgiving dinner. Get the serving trays ready." The smell intensified. 3 turkeys worth of roasting meat, the scent carrying through every room of the monastery. In the main ward, soldiers who'd been semi-conscious sat up. Men who hadn't eaten solid food in days requested early removal of feeding tubes. The psychological effect was measurable. Captain Sullivan reported later that patient vital signs improved across the board during the cooking. 1245 hours. O'Brien checked internal temperatures. Both turkeys were at 160 degrees climbing. Another 5 minutes would bring them to safety. She had 15 minutes before Morrison's deadline. German artillery bracket-fired the monastery at 1248 hours. 3 shells landed within 200 yards, shaking the building's foundation, dislodging roof tiles. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The oven door rattled but held. O'Brien and Marino stayed pressed against the wall, counting seconds between impacts, waiting for the barrage to pass. When silence returned at 1251 hours, O'Brien checked the turkeys again. Both had reached 165 degrees. Done. She pulled them from the oven at 1253 hours, working with Marino in practiced coordination. 3 turkeys, perfectly cooked, arrayed on makeshift serving trays fashioned from medical supply containers. The third turkey from the first cooking, the 2 from the second batch. 36 pounds of Thanksgiving dinner, cooked under active sniper fire, finished with 7 minutes to spare before the colonel's deadline. O'Brien carried the first tray toward the main ward at 1255 hours. Behind her, Marino followed with the second. The monastery's corridors filled with the smell of roasted turkey, of something impossible made real, of hope served on repurposed metal trays. When she entered the main ward, 187 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Private McKenna, who hadn't spoken in 4 days, said, "You did it." 1300 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison watched O'Brien and 4 orderlies serve Thanksgiving dinner to 187 wounded soldiers. They'd carved the 3 turkeys into portions, supplemented with canned vegetables from hospital stores, hardtack bread, whatever they could assemble into something resembling a proper meal. It wasn't much. Each soldier received perhaps 4 ounces of turkey, a spoonful of vegetables, 1 piece of bread. But it was Thanksgiving, served hot, prepared with care, cooked at personal risk by a nurse who'd decided hope mattered more than regulations. The psychological impact was immediate and measurable. Soldiers who'd refused food for days ate eagerly. Men who'd been non-responsive asked for seconds. Private McKenna talked to the soldier in the next cot, the first conversation he'd initiated since losing his leg. Corporal Wu smiled. Sergeant Hayes asked about the nurse who'd cooked under sniper fire. Captain Sullivan pulled O'Brien aside at 13:20 hours. "Sarah, that was the most reckless, dangerous, unauthorized thing I've seen a nurse do in this war." "Yes, ma'am. It was also the most effective medical intervention I've witnessed. Patient morale is transformed. Men who were dying from giving up are suddenly fighting to recover. You did in one morning what weeks of proper medical care couldn't achieve. We gave them hope, ma'am." "You risked your life for Turkey." "No, ma'am. I risked my life to show them someone cared enough to try the impossible. That mattered more than the turkey." Sullivan looked at the ward, at soldiers eating, talking, laughing for the first time in weeks. "I'm still putting this in your file, as a commendation." Over the following week, something changed in the 95th Evacuation Hospital. It started with the Thanksgiving dinner story spreading through the medical staff, then to other units, finally through the entire Allied force near Monte Cassino. The nurse who cooked under sniper fire became shorthand for a kind of courage that had nothing to do with combat. Other field hospitals started attempting similar morale-building operations. Not cooking, that remained too dangerous, but small, unauthorized acts of care that regulations prohibited. Nurses scrounged civilian clothes for soldiers whose uniforms were destroyed. Orderlies organized card games in hospital wards despite overcrowding. Doctors spent extra time talking to patients beyond medical consultations. The pattern spread informally, nurse to nurse, medic to medic, through the shared understanding that treating wounded soldiers meant addressing more than physical injuries. Headquarters never officially endorsed these practices. They just stopped actively prohibiting them. Private McKenna left the 95th on December 3rd, transferred to a recovery hospital in Naples. Before departing, he found O'Brien. "Ma'am, that Thanksgiving dinner saved my life, not the turkey. The fact you risked yours to make it happen made me realize if you thought I was worth that risk, maybe I should too." Corporal Wu recovered sufficiently to return to limited duty status by December 15th. He credited the Thanksgiving meal as the turning point. "I'd given up. Then I smelled turkey cooking and realized someone cared enough to do something insane. Figured if she could cook under sniper fire, I could survive a chest wound." Sergeant Hayes spent Christmas 1943 in recovery, eventually returning to civilian life in Georgia. He wrote O'Brien in 1955. "That Thanksgiving dinner you cooked changed everything for me. Not because of the food, because watching you risk death to give us hope taught me that survival meant more than just living. It meant choosing to care when caring seemed impossible." The Germans never learned why that monastery smelled like roasted turkey on November 25, 1943. Allied intelligence officers speculated later that German observers noted the unusual activity, but didn't understand it enough to effectively target. Sometimes the most effective tactics are simply too unconventional to predict. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison never formally disciplined O'Brien. Instead, he recommended her for the Bronze Star, citing exceptional devotion to duty and patient welfare under combat conditions. The recommendation included this line: "Lieutenant O'Brien's unauthorized Thanksgiving dinner operation demonstrated that military medicine requires more than technical skill. It requires understanding what wounded soldiers need to survive psychologically." Army Nurse Corps headquarters reviewed the case and declined the Bronze Star, stating that cooking didn't constitute combat action qualifying for decoration. They did, however, note the incident in O'Brien's personnel file as an example of innovative morale building under adverse conditions. Sarah O'Brien remained with the 95th Evacuation Hospital through the remainder of the Italian campaign, participating in the advance to Rome in June 1944. Then supporting operations in southern France. She accumulated 14 months of frontline nursing service before rotating home in August 1945. She returned to Chicago, resumed civilian nursing at Cook County Hospital, never mentioned the Thanksgiving cooking incident. When colleagues asked about her war service, she deflected. "I did what any nurse would do, took care of soldiers." The Army Nurse Corps offered her a regular Army commission in 1946. She declined. "I joined to serve during the war. The war's over. Time for someone else to serve." She married in 1948 Dr. Thomas McKenna, former Private First Class Thomas McKenna, the Brooklyn soldier who'd stopped speaking until he smelled turkey cooking. They'd reconnected at a veterans' reunion, discovered shared trauma, built a relationship from mutual understanding of what survival actually meant. O'Brien worked as a civilian nurse until 1978, retiring at 61. She specialized in psychiatric nursing, treating veterans with what later generations would call PTSD. Her approach emphasized small acts of care, practical interventions, showing patients that someone cared enough to try the difficult thing. She died March 15, 2003, age 85 in Chicago. The obituary mentioned her Army Nurse Corps service, her marriage to Dr. McKenna, her work with veterans. It said nothing about cooking Thanksgiving dinner under sniper fire. At her funeral, 17 former patients from the 95th Evacuation Hospital attended. They'd stayed in contact over the decades, gathering annually to remember November 25, 1943, when hope arrived in the form of 3 turkeys, cooked by a nurse who'd decided regulations mattered less than caring. One of them, Corporal Wu, by then 83 and using a walker, spoke at the service. "Sarah O'Brien saved my life in Italy. Not with medical skill, with turkey. She risked everything to show us we mattered. That lesson sustained me for 60 years. The 95th Evacuation Hospital disbanded in 1945. No official records mention the Thanksgiving cooking incident. Army archives contain Morrison's Bronze Star recommendation and headquarters rejection, but nothing about the operation itself. The story survived only in veteran testimonies, personal letters, informal accounts shared among those who were there. Historians later estimated that O'Brien's Thanksgiving intervention indirectly saved between 30 and 50 lives. Not through the meal itself, but through the psychological shift it created. Soldiers who'd been dying from giving up chose to fight for recovery. Infection rates dropped. Recovery times improved. The numbers weren't dramatic enough for official notice, but they were measurable. Modern military medicine acknowledges the importance of psychological care for wounded soldiers, incorporating morale-building activities into treatment protocols. Field hospitals now have recreation specialists, mental health counselors, programs designed to address the emotional trauma of combat injuries. None cite O'Brien's Thanksgiving dinner as precedent, but the principle is identical. Wounded soldiers need more than physical treatment. November 25, 1943. 1 Army nurse, 3 turkeys, 4 hours under sniper fire. 187 wounded soldiers who needed hope more than they needed safety. Sarah O'Brien understood what military medicine sometimes forgets. Healing isn't just about closing wounds. It's about giving people reasons to want those wounds to close. Sometimes that means following regulations. Sometimes it means cooking Thanksgiving dinner in a monastery kitchen while German snipers wait for you to make one wrong move. She chose wrong moves, and 187 men lived because of it. The Army never officially recognized what O'Brien did that morning. They couldn't. Acknowledging it would mean endorsing unauthorized operations under enemy fire. But the soldiers who ate that Thanksgiving dinner never forgot. They carried the lesson forward. Sometimes the most important thing isn't what's safe or permitted. It's what's necessary to remind people they're worth saving. If this story moved you, remember that thousands of Army nurses served in combat zones during World War II, performing unauthorized acts of care that regulations prohibited but wounded soldiers required. They cooked meals under fire, scrounged supplies through black markets, violated protocols to provide comfort, risked everything to show soldiers someone cared. Sarah O'Brien was one of them. There were thousands more. Most never received recognition. They didn't need it. They had something better. The knowledge that they'd chosen compassion over safety, and that choice saved lives. That's the Thanksgiving legacy worth remembering.